Thank you, John, and it is wonderful to be here today. I so appreciate getting a chance to participate. Colleagues, there are at least 3 goals for this panel. The first one is very simply to encourage and support you in the work of international collaboration, which has never been so important if we are to confront the grand challenges of our time. And it's also never been so challenging because of geopolitical and other forces. So we are here at CUNY, all of us, from the Research Foundation, CUNY Central, from the CUNY School of Public Health to the great CUNY colleges. We want to do more and better to promote your work. We want to establish a model partnership with the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science. We have in the JSPS a high-quality partnership, and we want to grow and nurture that to the betterment of science and to CUNY faculty. Finally, and I can't underline this strongly enough, I very much appreciate John's words. Working with John Sapogas has been a highlight of my time in the central office, but I want to say that we know CUNY needs to step up its game as a potential international collaborator around the world. We need to establish, and when I say we, I mean the RF, I mean CUNY Central, I mean the colleges, I mean our great professional schools, starting with the CUNY School of Public Health. We need to step up our game to improve the infrastructure, the financial infrastructure that will support travel to conferences and other places, the legal infrastructure that will enable MOUs that you can have confidence in and that you can get approvals for in a reasonable period of time, informational support, community support, incentives for the work. So we want to learn from our colleagues, and the 3 people here are exceptional. Just say another word before throwing out the first question and turning this over to them. We want to know what we need to do to get stronger and better in these ways. Supporting you, supporting this wonderful partnership that we're here to celebrate today, and getting stronger as an attractive international partner for the rest of the world, Japan and beyond. The 3 scholars who are here today, Yoko, Brian, and Vicky, were selected because they have successful collaborations. But after talking to each of them, I can tell you they were also selected because they are ambassadors for CUNY in the insightfulness, the thoughtfulness, the humility, the kindness that they bring to this work. International collaboration, if it's going to be more than a one-shot, requires commitment and caring, and not a transactional attitude, but a mutually supportive atmosphere. And I think you're going to find this in our panelists. My first question, colleagues on the panel, is why? There are many reasons to pursue international work. Why did you pursue this work, and how did you choose the collaborators, the partnering institutions that you did, or were you in fact identified and selected by others? Vicki, can I turn to you first? Why do you do international work?
Thank you, Vita. Thank you, CUNY, CUNY RF, for organizing this wonderful event. I'm so excited to be here. When I think back about why, I think it started out because I was bitten by the travel bug as an undergraduate my first year, and started traveling and became very fascinated with culture and understanding culture. And at the time, I was a psychology major, and I was also very interested in minority health. But I didn't know how to bring these 2 worlds together, and so I majored in Asian American studies and psychology, and the theories didn't quite make sense to me. They were very individualistic, and I didn't feel like they applied to me. And so, it initially started out as a journey to understand my own experience and resulted in opening this door to travel. And I went to Hong Kong and Taiwan as an undergraduate and just fell in love with understanding culture. And I feel also like you learn a lot more about whatever process or whatever phenomenon you're studying much better when you understand it from multiple perspectives and when you understand context and culture and how these larger factors impact what you see, and it allows you to see the range in behaviors or factors, and it also gives opportunity for more innovation because you see things from multiple perspectives. So for me, that's how it started. I started working in Vietnam in 2000 as a first-year graduate student. So I applied for a grant along with my advisor at the time to develop mental health research infrastructure in Vietnam. And we spent the year scanning the country, talking to everybody we could talk to about mental health, where services were provided, who was doing research, what kind of players were in that space, and there were not very many, so it actually was an opportunity for me because nothing really existed. And as as a graduate student at the time, not very many opportunities allow you to lead, but because nothing really existed, it gave me that opportunity very early on, and we ended up developing the first doctoral program in clinical psychology in the country. And from that, other things developed. So now I'm leading a NIH R01 project to scale up depression care in 54 communities in Vietnam and studying the implementation models for that. But that came about after basically the last 20 years of research. It started out, basically developing capacity, and then from there developing intervention models and testing this in the community health settings in Vietnam. And really opened the door for a lot of the research that I currently do around task shifting and implementation science. And so for me, that's, where my career has led. And it was primarily because I started out traveling and, wanting to understand culture, but it's been a huge force in my life and would be something that I do regardless of whether I got funding or not. So it's just like part of my identity and my life mission, I think.
It's wonderful. Thank you. Brian, how about you?
Well, let me also say thank you very much to RF CUNY for hosting us today. And I think that I agree with Vita that this is an important panel. This is a very important conversation that we as the community of scholars at CUNY really need to be having right now. And especially just thinking very practically and pragmatically about what can we do to get involved. And what does that look like from the point of view of our individual experiences? For myself, I'm speaking now as a very, very early career scholar. I just graduated from CUNY with my PhD this past May. Thank you. And it was, I think, less than a week after completing my dissertation defense that I was off to Japan through JSPS for my postdoc. I actually had to come back for graduation. But that was not the beginning of my relationship with Japan. That goes back more than a decade. After I received my bachelor's from University of Texas at Dallas, I was somewhat adrift intellectually, and I felt that, as many people of that age do, that I could stand to have a real eye-opening life adventure. So off I went to Japan to teach English as a second language, as a lot of people who have a connection with Japan in particular, I think, can understand and identify with that experience. But it was during that year when I was working as a teacher and an instructor that I really began to think in terms of not only my own graduate, my future in graduate study, which led to psychology, but also, just as Vicki was saying, just thinking about the individualistic perspective that I was just so accustomed to and I had so taken for granted coming from the United States, and really coming to understand that, well, indeed, there are other perspectives that are possible on a variety of issues impacting on mental health, which was my particular area of interest, and especially around sexuality and gender, which was something that I was going through in a very personal way, but also that I was getting involved with a community of activists in the Tokyo area who are working around LGBTQ rights at that time. And it was through those experiences that I became very passionate about wanting to explore, as a psychologist, cultural variation and variability around not only issues of sexuality and gender, but also how that interacts with identity and also with mental health, especially with minority stressors such as just how do you fit in when you're not really on the inside of a society that really emphasizes the importance of fitting in. So this was something that was very, very important for me. During the period of time while I was there in those early years, as I said, I was not really connected with psychology as a field. That required me coming back to the US. But just before I did so, I reached out to the American Psychological Association, and I knew nobody. I knew nothing, and all I knew to do was to say, hey, I'm like a prospective grad student. I'm interested in doing something research related around psychology. Is there anybody in Tokyo? And lo and behold, the president of the Division 44, which is the Sexual Orientation and Gender Diversity Division, wrote back to me and said, as it happens, one of our emeritus professors is coming through on a research fellowship, and I'll put you in touch. And she did so, and he came through town. This was Doug Kimmel, who was emeritus professor from City College. And I met him for lunch in Omotesando in Tokyo one day, and he said, you might want to think about CUNY. We have a really fantastic international community. We've got a few scholars who are connected with Japan, and if you're really interested in pursuing this further, I can certainly help you to start that networking opportunity. So that would be the first key person that I knew was Doug. So I got to New York, and from that point on, as I began my studies, I was always looking for ways to try and reconnect with Japan. Doug was extraordinarily helpful with helping me get that ball rolling. But it was another bit of serendipity that led to the big break, as I like to think of it. I was looking for opportunities for language exchange here in the city. And there's a few websites you can log into for free, I can add. And one of them, I made contact with a visiting scholar from Saitama University, just north of the Tokyo area, who was over at NYU in developmental psych. And we met first as just a language exchange, but as we started to learn more about each other, she was coming from developmental psych, I was coming from social personality psych, and we just started to really get very much engaged with one another's research as we were also learning one another's language. And through that collaboration, very informal at that point, she eventually spoke with her department at Saitama University, and they funded me to come over for about 3 weeks to do data collection, initial data collection for my dissertation. And it was through that key researcher, and I have to give a shout out to her, Yuki Shimizu from Saitama University. She helped me connect with what would become my host sponsor through the Fulbright as well as the JSPS programs, and that is Dr. Yuko Higashi at Osaka Prefecture University. So it was a very interesting and sort of roundabout way, but I think just as Vicky was saying, that passion was there from a very early point. I had a passion for wanting to connect specifically with the Japanese culture and language, and that really helped me, I think, to find these points of serendipity, or at least to find myself in situations where there was a possibility for me to take the next step. And it was absolutely due to these key people around me in my life at that time that became possible. So I guess the take-home point is, it's not something you can do by yourself. It takes a community, it takes a village, and it takes, I think, nurturing those relationships from a very early point. You don't know where they're going to lead, but some of them might lead you to international collaboration and research. So, yeah, that's what I will say at this point.
That's terrific. So Yoko, finally to you. Why did you pursue international work, and how did you get started?
I was listening to everybody and started thinking, well, we all did it by, so to speak, accident.
Yes.
Everything is bunch of serendipity and good work. Mm-hmm. But I don't think we are just lucky. I think we are really open, and we are willing to sort of learn from each other. And we are excited about differences instead of just being rigid about what we know. And that is a key for international collaboration. I wasn't looking for international collaboration. I left Japan 30 years ago. I never wanted to go back to Japan. I kept thinking Japan sucks. I won't go. And then but a few years ago, not recently, long time ago now, I got the Career Development Award from NIMH, and one of the training opportunity was epigenetics, and that was the beginning of the field, and I have a luxury of connecting with a bunch of people all over the world, people who are doing epigenetic work. Most of them are in Europe, and I was just really my attitude, I am very, very sort of weird. I feel like, I get excited about everything. I don't want to, if I see somebody making a beautiful sort of blade, I get excited and I want to learn how to do it. And that sort of sense of wonder and, a desire to do something new just let me, got so hooked to epigenetics. And through my Career Development Award, I was offered a position at King's College in England. And I was going to King's College on sabbatical. And I was very, very excited about it because I will be able to go everywhere, like European countries and places I've never been. Then something happened. My brother in Japan fell off the second floor and hit his head. So I have to find a way to go to Japan, taking advantage of sabbatical. And but before that, I have to. So I started thinking, well, too bad, I have to go back, but I will. But if I am going back, I just want to make the best of it. So I started looking around, and I know nothing about Japan, even if I came from Japan. So fortunately, my college provost, Betsy, I call her Betsy, so I don't know her last name.
That's right. Okay. Hendry.
Sorry. Right. She was very supportive of my weirdness and desire to do something exciting and unusual with Japan. At that time, Queen's College was hosting a bunch of Japanese scholars, and I was hanging out with those people. And so I asked Betsy out of the blue, would you pay for my trip? And she said, yes.
Provost say yes.
And she said, yes. I was thinking, wow, it's good to ask. Then yes. that was, if I didn't ask, I didn't do a preparation well enough to be able to get started, what do you call it? American people call it hit the ground running.
Yes.
I couldn't have done it. But I went to Japan and I observed places and I talked to the nearby colleges where Queen's College has an affiliation with and asked them, I do this, is there anybody who might be interested in doing this with me? So I identified Hamamatsu University, I went there, and then rest is a history. I get along with people really well, and I just came back from Japan yesterday. I am jet lagged.
Yes.
It's really the secret for successful collaboration is not to wait. I mean, when opportunity like this happens, I would really want everybody to take something out of it, but it's really hard. Listening to people's story doesn't really help you to do anything. Maybe you get information, but so what? It's really difficult. But I really want you to get up and do something, because something can take you something else. And it's always it's better to sort of let people know you are doing this. And when people begin to know you, they are going to let you know something else. This is available. Are you interested? Or, I mean, you never know what happens. So I really have a good collaboration with Hamamatsu University. We wrote a lot of papers together. We are writing a lot of, failed grant, applications. But still, we tried. And through that, they trust me and I trust them. And it's Hamamatsu University of Medicine become my second home. So that's, I can keep going, but, telling you about my story is not going to help you. So I'm going to stop now.
You've been tremendously helpful, and I know you got here just last night. I so appreciate that you were here. My next question is, how engaging in global research, in another country, has changed the kind of scientist, scholar, researcher you are, the kind of thinker you are. So what if and I hear I'm putting the thumb on the scale just a little bit, what benefit do you get from the different perspectives that you encounter? Vicki, again, would you start?
Gosh, there's so many benefits. I'd say that my experience working in Vietnam and working in Uganda and working with different collaborators from different countries has been central to my development as a scholar. Even the work that I do now around task shifting, much of that came from the necessity in Vietnam because it was a place where mental health services really didn't exist. And so we had to use community health workers or nurses and other types of people to think about how we might deliver this kind of care. And at the time, that would have been very hard to do in the United States because we have a very different system that, although more advanced in some ways, also is more, there's more logistical reasons, more practical reasons why, and legal reasons why that can't happen as easily in the United States. And so, I felt like that experience earlier on allowed me to do the research on that, show that it can work. And now the tide has turned. Now that is starting to happen in the United States. So, I think a lot of what can happen in different developing contexts can actually inform the work that we do here in the U.S. And we're definitely seeing it now. There's that area of research is so much more developed in low middle-income countries like Vietnam and India and all throughout Africa. And here in the United States, in New York, we're starting it. And so certainly I think it's been tremendous in that way.
Vicki, when we spoke earlier, one of the things you said that sticks with me is working in developing countries, you have to start small. Because there's just not, could you talk a little bit about this idea?
So my strategy has always been to start small and kind of fly under the radar a little bit because you have less oversight and you don't have to think about all the system issues as much. And so it gives you an opportunity to see where things don't work. And the risks are small, are less when it's a smaller project. And so we actually started out with one hospital and just, working in that hospital and figuring out the kinks. And then we designed the study and implemented it and evaluated it. And now, 10 years later, we now have national involvement so that we can scale up. But had we gone the other route first, we would have had more barriers, I think. And so the work I'm doing in Uganda, the same thing. We start out small and we figure it out, and then we start to think about larger, bigger partners who can help us take it to scale.
Thank you. Brian, how has your work in Japan and perhaps other places changed the kind of psychologist you are?
I think that I think of the answer to this in two ways. One, involving the kind of focus that my research has sort of taken, and this kind of links to, I think, what Yoko was talking about before with how her research has also sort of been part and parcel to the opportunities that were presented to her. but also how I am evolving now professionally, just thinking about myself, again, as an early career professional, early career psychologist, and where I'm heading in that direction. And they're both interconnected in very intimate ways. So as you read in the little blurb on the flyer here, the research I was doing most recently in Japan involved talking with a lot of public sector teachers and other people involved in education in Japan. And one aspect of this research that really became very clear to me as I was talking with and meeting with a lot of these educators, and keep in mind, we're talking about a very, very hidden community in Japan of educators, many of whom are terrified that if they are outed in their workplace, they're going to lose their jobs because there are no anti-discrimination laws in place to protect them from being fired. And many of them that I spoke to had the experience of losing their jobs or being driven out of their jobs in less explicit ways. And a lot of what I was hearing in those stories had to do with policy, actually. What was going on at the national level in terms of educational policy, what the Ministry of Education was sending out, was communicating to both teachers and students and administration at local schools about how teachers, how administrators were to try to interact with these minority children and minority students. This particular study came about because there was no guidance whatsoever, and not even the tacit recognition that some of the instructional staff themselves might actually be sexual or gender minorities. And there was really nothing in the way of institutional support for these people. And again, through these experiences, I started to think much more about the role that policy has in the kind of research that we do and in the dissemination of the research that we are trying to conduct. I'm not coming from a public health background specifically, and I kind of wish I had at this point because I'm hearing how integrated policy is in that particular educational framework. That's something that I would like to really bring more into mainstream psychology as a discipline as well. And I'm actually now looking at opportunities for taking the next step by pursuing a postdoctoral postdoctoral policy fellowships in DC. Hopefully one of those will come through. But I definitely, over the last couple of years, especially through the JSPS period when I was in Japan, I've been thinking and talking with my colleagues much more about that. Just one other thing, just talking about starting small with the research, that's definitely been my experience as well. Again, I'm working with a population that has really gone under the radar for decades. There are very few researchers. It's a very loose network of researchers in Japan who are interested in sexuality and gender issues. Some are in psychology, many of them are not. And being very open and very interdisciplinary has been absolutely vital to the work I'm doing. And I think in many ways, just thinking multiculturally, multinationally helps to really, in terms of thinking multidisciplinary as well. You just kind of get used to, again, perspective taking, being able to get outside of your own comfort zone. So again, professionally, if there's something that I've learned, it's that my initial instincts as a younger grad student that I wanted to pursue other perspectives, I wanted to take on other points of view, I wanted to take on more interdisciplinary perspectives. I think it gets reinforced. If you actually get out there, if you're actually doing this kind of cross-cultural collaborative work, you're going to be immersed in it. You're going to be in the thick of it for the entire time you're doing this. And I think that's reinforcing of those instincts that probably brought you there in the first place.
Thank you. Terrific. Yoko, what would you like to add about how the kind of scientist you are has changed as a result of your work?
I have a large laboratory at Queen's College with a bunch of undergraduate students and graduate students and a postdoc and other collaborating faculty members. Because of my collaboration I had with other countries, I am able to encourage students to take what we do. They learn, they have to help me. I have a large-scale study, ongoing study. So they are part of my study team, on my team, and they learn how to do research, and they take it to their own native countries. So I have a bunch of students from Costa Rica, for example, Taiwan, Africa, Spain, South Americas, and whenever they go back home, I encourage them to get in touch with a hospital in their native countries and start collecting something we are collecting. I have been collecting placenta, cord blood, urine, anything, the toenail, hair, saliva, and I have been monitoring the reactivity between mother and the child. So my students learn how to do it. They know, even my children, when they are younger, learn how to harvest placenta, how to do all those things. That's by looking at, by observing me doing it. And I encourage them to go back and do that. And especially CUNY has a Macaulay Honor College attached to a college. And Macaulay people have opportunity funding, and they go everywhere. So one of the students, for example, is a finalist for going to Poland to do the same study, identical study I am conducting in a much smaller scale, choosing what they want to do, she wants to do. And one of them went to Cape Cod. Whenever they go, I tell them, take whatever you need and just do it. Just collect 10 people. Just plant seed everywhere. You never know what happens, and by doing it, you get to work with native people, people in that country, and that can lead you to do something bigger. And even if it doesn't turn out to be anything, it's fun to work with them.
Yes.
And that's how I enjoy kind of convincing people that you should go and do it. You can do it, and I'm not really doing it for them only. I have this secret desire. Maybe they're going to become bigger in the future, and when it happens, I can collaborate with them.
There you go.
So, I have this calculated thought. But, just as Brian said, we have to start something small. And whenever we meet somebody new, we just should make the best of it, because we never know when we die. I'm not being fatalistic, but if you take the opportunity, you might be able to do something really exciting. Another thing I also tell people through collaboration is that I learn to focus on group instead of individual. And I'm not saying that, being individualistic and having your own unique identity is a bad thing. You have to have both. You have to be a great talent, somebody who can be on your own and independent, but you have to be a very present team player as well. You have to have both. And if you learn what's good about the foreign countries and just start learning something new, you are going to definitely become somebody better. And by you becoming better, your collaborators are going to be better. And I always say that, competition is a bad thing. We have to cooperate. And when you cooperate, you can make everything twice as big.
It's terrific. Because we're running out of time, I'm going to combine two questions that I think are too important to ignore, given the audience we have today. They are, what are the challenges that you have experienced, the major challenges, there are many, in international work, and what advice do you have for the faculty in this audience who want to launch or scale up global collaborations? Vicky, again, as briefly as so we can get.
I wanted just to touch on what Yoko was saying about group and community. I think that that's really key to global health work or global work in general, is just working in teams, because you need all those different perspectives. And so all of my work has been very community-based and CBPR-oriented. But with that comes a lot of challenges, because you've got multiple stakeholders with multiple priorities and limited resources, and how you divide that up and how you share, and all of these conversations sometimes have to be in the forefront. And I think particularly when you're working with communities and cultural groups that may not be as accustomed to talking about things so explicitly, when you have to talk about money and resources, that's a very hard conversation to have. And I struggle with it. I still do. I hate dealing with money. But it has been one of the things that has undermined some of my collaborations, is not being upfront about what those challenges are and the different expectations that come from that.
Right. You mean expectations, for example, about how people get paid, how much they get, all that kind of,
Right. And then the disparity in pay, and, there's so many different things that are tied to that. And then, different organizations have different approaches. And so that has been very challenging. And it comes back down to worth also, what people see as valuable. And we don't always agree on what is valued and how it's valued. And so that's challenging.
Okay. Vicki, if you had one piece of advice to give to people who want to start, what would it be?
Collaborations. I think that's key. I mean, every project I've done, everything I've done has been part of a network. And that's really the only way to do it, I think.
Terrific. Brian, same two questions. What are the challenges you've faced in international collaborations, and what advice do you have for the audience?
In terms of challenges, and I'm speaking again as a recent grad student, I think one of the key challenges that I personally faced, and I can't say whether everybody would experience this or not, but it could be part and parcel of just the kind of person I am too. I was overwhelmed with my first collaborative opportunities, because I was being invited in by these senior researchers that I already respected, but I felt like not only do I need to prove myself as an up-and-coming scholar, but I'm also in a way representing my entire country and my entire discipline as it's represented in the United States in that collaborative relationship. And I felt very much a pressure I want to absolutely knock it out of the ballpark. I want to be impressive. I want to be on top of it. I want to be comprehensive and thorough. And especially when we're talking about a cultural context where the culture and the language were very different from the one I'm used to. I do speak some Japanese. I have a certain level of fluency, but I would not consider myself completely fluent. And so I was laboring also under that sense of, oh crap, how am I going to actually talk about this? If they asked me to actually conduct interviews, they did, by the way. Or if I'm going to have to present in front of an audience in an academic setting, am I going to be able to do that? Am I going to be able to keep my stuff together? Sure, I had faith that I would be able to prepare, but that doesn't detract from just the sheer overwhelming weight of what you're being asked to do. But at the end of the day, what I realized is that it's okay to communicate your concerns with the people you are collaborating with. They're not blind. They understand, yes, especially if you are a younger researcher or a scholar yourself, they know that you're going to be going through this. They feel the same way. I bet that our speakers earlier today were also feeling a bit apprehensive about getting in front of all of you and speaking in English. I would be.
Right.
And I have nothing but respect for people who can. My advice would be, don't keep it to yourself. Communicate. Don't be afraid to communicate. You may be concerned that communication itself is one of the stressors. Find a way, and I think that's part of what we're talking about here. You will be able to find those key people with whom you can develop these relationships. These may not be the people you end up collaborating with directly. They may instead direct you to other people that you can. But these will be the point people for you in your cross-cultural experience. As a matter of fact, as I've been working on my research, I continue to go back to these key people for just the emotional and intellectual support that have really carried me through my projects.
Yoko, the challenges you've faced and what is most important for the audience to hear from you.
Sorry. I would find a win-win situation. I would try to make things win-win so that you want to tell them, you want to tell your potential collaborator what you want. And you also need to tell them, in return, I could do this. And if we work together, it's going to be much more fun, much more productive. You are going to try to convince them that it's mutually beneficial. You don't have to assume, you mustn't assume that people understand. People don't think you are just taking advantage of others. You have to clarify, you have to say it. You have to say that this is what I want and this is what I can give. Let's make the situation mutually beneficial. That's what I would start.
That's terrific. And here, anyone who wants to answer, a load on, it's one of the goals of this panel. What do you want from CUNY? What would make things, what can RF CUNY do? Can CUNY Central do? Can your colleges, like that wonderful provost, Betsy Hendry at Queens College, what can we do? And it's not just money. I mean, that's the easy answer. And I know it's part of the answer, but what can we do to get out of your way when we need to get out of your way and add value where we can? Whoever wants to start. What can we do? Go ahead.
I would like CUNY to be a little bit more sort of tighter. I don't really know what other people are doing. And it would be nice if we know who is doing what and we have some sort of collective time to be together so that, you know, we kind of develop that sense of community, and that's what's lacking. I feel like I exist in a vacuum and I have my own colony, but if my colony can be attached to something else or different campuses, that is going to make things so much more productive and more fun.
Terrific. Yes, Vicki.
I want to just reiterate the same thing. I think understanding what the landscape here is and who's doing what, because so many of these barriers that, for example, that I've encountered, I think if someone else who has gotten that grant or has, you know, worked with a particular group around, you know, resolving certain issues, then it can be shared so that it can help other researchers, and then I can learn from other researchers how to deal with some of these barriers, because I think the barrier is pretty common across different researchers when you're doing global work. So that like networking opportunities would be really great. The institutional support around, you know, bringing together grant opportunities and collaborators, much like what you're doing today, I think is excellent. And just having more of a conversation around it, because I think, you know, what Yoko was saying around like feeling like you're isolated and you're working in your own little bubble can be discouraging. And I think, you know, that's one of the hardest things in global work is your collaborators across the world. And your team sometimes is across the world, so you feel like you're working by yourself. Right. And having that shared community here would be wonderful.
Terrific. Brian, do you want to add anything?
Really nothing to add to that. I would exactly repeat that, and I would say that that problem might even be more acutely experienced by grad students who really have no idea where to go.
Yes. Yes. Right. In our conversation, some of you have mentioned difficulties with MOUs and IRB, because getting informed consent from colleagues internationally is a whole different ballgame than getting informed consent here in the United States. Does anybody want to talk about those kinds of barriers and what CUNY might do to help with those things, or am I overreacting to that? Okay.
Actually, I think that that's a really important barrier for people who do global work, especially if you're working in low resource settings where the infrastructure isn't the same, and also people have different reactions to informed consent anytime you're like in Vietnam, for example, when you're signing a document and you're talking to your doctor and you're in a hospital and it's a government facility, people, start to think, oh, wait a minute, am I under surveillance? Am I, especially when you're talking about following them over time, longitudinally. So it creates a lot of anxiety. And then as a result, you spend so much more of your effort trying to engage the partners around being part of a research project because they feel like it creates more resistance, because of the informed consent process. And so one of the things that we did at RAND, I think that can be useful here is just having a little bit more orientation for the IRB members so they understand the context. And one of the things we do at RAND is that during the IRB committee, the review committees, the PIs are invited to come and respond to questions, which I think can be very helpful because it creates that dialogue. And, at the end of the day, everybody wants to make sure we're protecting our participants and that we are, ethical in the work that we do. But sometimes that concern for risk management or the risk management process undermines the actual work itself. And so I think that could be very helpful. So just having some preliminary dialogue and maybe some training for for people who do global work. That's because, great. The context is very different. And so I think that could be very helpful.
Okay, folks, we could go on for, you're a wonderful source of information and inspiration, but it's time for questions from the audience.